Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Reason Why. This is the Catalina Foothills Church Apologetics class. And if you don't know what apologetics is, you'll know by the end of this class for sure. Who, by a show of hands, was here at the last week's event? Oh my goodness, all right. There were a few that were not here, so Gil, you might have some explaining to do. All right, I'll just open us up in prayer and then get right to it. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for being the Lord Almighty. And Lord, we know that when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor. And Lord, let us do both today. Father, let us engage lovingly. Let us flesh out truth and go, as I said last week, wherever that leads us. Father, we just pray that you embolden us this week, that you embolden us in our families and in our lives. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, so I didn't introduce myself so much last time because I wasn't the main speaker. So just real quick about me. I'm the leader of this ministry, this class, and that is pretty much limited to this class once a month, every second Sunday. And then we do have events every once in a while, and in February we're having an event with three big-name apologists. Frank Turek, J. Warner Wallace, and Mike Adams are coming, and they're going to be coming February 10th and 11th. Alan Schliemann from Stand to Reason's coming to town October 29th, location to be determined. And so we've got some exciting things. He's not coming to this church, Alan, but he's going to be in town, so we want to make those kinds of events known. It's that kind of thing and the monthly reminder that I email, and I have a list back there in the corner by that door that Todd's showing everybody. If you want. Yeah. Just like last week, but I didn't announce it then. That was your name. Thanks, Todd. So put on your email. A lot of you are on there. I also sent out a response to the talk last week. So if you didn't get that, put your email in there. I'll send you that as well. I'm not going to be able to get to it all today. Want to remind you to go to church. This is a good turnout here. There's a lot of people. It's a long Sunday morning if you do a class and then you have worship. I understand that. It might be long for your kids if you have kids in the nursery, but just we worship. Those of us as Christians, if God is real and He really did what we think He did, we respond in worship. I don't have to tell you that. I'm preaching to the choir. If you're not a Christian, if you're a skeptic or just a non-Christian or a seeker, check us out. That's what we do. We worship. So that's at 11 o'clock. Facebook, we've got a page. So if you miss out on emails or rather not have emails, we have a Facebook page. Email me and then I'll put you on it so you get extra updates and more conversation. Today's format, I'm going to have equal time that Dr. Shapiro had last week, which was roughly 40-45 minutes. And then we're going to invite Dr. Shapiro to come back up. He's gracious enough to come back. I didn't introduce myself. I lost my train of thought with the email. Let me back up a little bit. Rewind the tape. Anyway, I'm the leader of this ministry, but I also I'm just a volunteer. I'm not on staff at the church. I have a graduate degree from Biola University in Christian apologetics, a very specialized advanced degree in fielding questions and challenges to Christianity. So I've been teaching for about 12 years ever since then in this in another church. So that's my background that I bring. Professionally, I'm a criminal investigator, so just by mind and method, I like to fact find and put the pieces together and have to acquire knowledge that way. So I just apply that to the spiritual realm for apologetics. So the format, after my 40-45 minutes, we're going to invite Dr. Shapiro up. That's why there's two chairs here. And so we're going to dialogue.
Dan.
Sorry?
They're all saying, what's his name?
Dr. Shapiro? Dr. Oh, I'm sorry. That's part of the introduction. That's the first thing you're supposed to say. Okay. Dan Grossenbach. Spell that. Thanks. So now we have all that out of the way. We're going to have my response, Shapiro come up, and then we're going to have a Q&A. For the Q&A, because we're so crunched on time and we want to really get to the good stuff, we've got cards in the back. Right behind where Dr. Shapiro is right now, there's a cup of pens and some index cards. Steve Johnson is going to be compiling those And we're going to try to get through them all. That's going to be our goal, but it's probably not going to happen. Based on last week, we had a line of questions, and that's the brave souls that came up to the mic. So when they're anonymous and on cards, we may have a lot. But please do it. If you have something in your mind, the quicker you get it back to Steve, the quicker he's going to be able to read it. No questions criticizing Christianity, though. Okay. But this is a class on secular humanism. This is a class, generally speaking, on defending the faith of Christianity and the worldview. But we also address alternative views like secular humanism, which is why we're here and we're trying to understand it. So I do want questions and the focus to be on secular humanism. It could be the Christian's response to secular humanism. Why do Christians not do like secular humanists do? But let's try to keep it related. I'm going to ask Steve to filter out questions that have no connection to secular humanism at all. Is that fair to ask? Yeah. So we want to keep the conversation going for the purpose at hand. I may be going to their group on November 20th. We're working on that, and we'll find out more details and let you know. So we'll get started here. Rather than prepare something new, I decided to go with what has already been presented, and that is the case that Dr. Shapiro laid out. And I'm not going to go slide by slide. There's going to be some skipping here. So get ready with your eyes. You might see a lot of flashing on the screen. But I want to do that so that we're just focusing on the big topics. And the big topics really are epistemology, how we come to know things. And I think that's what Dr. Shapiro mentions as one of his big goals in communicating the differences between secular humanism and Christianity or religion in general. We did talk about several of these topics as possible topics to discuss, either his visit here or mine to his group. And I can't believe he tried to tackle them all. That was actually a great effort to get to every topic on here, at least on a surface level, to cover it a little bit. We may not get into that in my response, but we will a little. Let's see here. Okay, here's his goals. Here's what he wanted to accomplish. Better understanding of secular humanism. I think we got a pretty good one. He's articulate and smart and well-spoken, so it came across, I think, fairly clear. Number two is one that I'm going to take issue with, but I want to make sure that we all understand it. Reason-based thinking, and that is separate from faith-based thinking, is different. And it's reason-based thinking is better than faith-based thinking, which gives us only beliefs. And since we are doing Q&A afterwards, hold on to your questions, like a compressed bottle that's ready to blow. Have some really good ones ready when you get to that card, and we'll get to those. But just hold off, unless you can't hear, you wonder where the bathroom is, if you really need a bad cup of coffee or something like that. Anyway, so number three, secular humanists and Christians can't talk to each other clearly, as we're doing today. Number four, that the religious should not seek to impose on our pluralistic society views derived from their dogma or doctrine. That secularism is the only reliable means of preserving public order and freedom for all. Another theme is politics, so involvement in public policy, enforcing public policy that influences a Christian worldview into law would be, I think, one of the things that they're opposed to. So backing up here, I want to touch briefly on mainly this slide here. Number four, I think. Yeah, number four is that religious values should not be imposed on others on a pluralistic society. Now, being in law enforcement, I've really thought about this. Being in law enforcement and a Christian, I wonder how do we enforce laws that invoke a moral value, like hurting people's wrong, or stealing things are wrong, all the wrongs that we have, without invoking some sort of a moral value behind it. We like to think that laws are all pretty much morally benign and self-secular, but there is definitely a moral component. And secular humanists would believe that moral component comes from somewhere outside of religion, comes from somewhere secular. But there is really no way to keep a neutral view on law or any sort of public policy, you're either on one side or the other. The only way to remain neutral is say nothing and not vote, right? The question is, where do those morals come from? And so that's what we'll be discussing. Okay, he's going to be talking about some definitions, and I'm not going to take issue with the definitions. They're pretty good, and I'm not going to argue with the humanists on how they define humanism. Otherwise, if I did, I'd be talking to somebody else. This uncomfortable fact, if you're born in Saudi Arabia of Muslim parents, or if you were born in India, you'd most likely be Hindu, is it's a compelling rhetorical comment, and you hear it a lot, especially the popular atheist books, like I think Richard Dawkins cites this as an example. But it's an example of the genetic fallacy and what the genetic fallacy is, and in fact it's like a textbook example. I looked at my textbook, logic books from seminary, grad school, and I didn't find it in there, but I remember seeing it somewhere, is that if you attack a view for where that originated, rather than the merits of the merits of the argument itself, they're committing what's called a genetic fallacy. So it doesn't work as far as just saying where we were born. So if I teach my kids things at home, and I teach them religious things as well, what makes me teaching them about how weather works or geography just because it came from my home as a Christian? You have to talk about how I was wrong in those ideas. So we can't say Christianity is wrong because we were born and raised in a Christian culture. Does that make sense? In fact, I think I've talked to a few skeptics who were raised in Christian homes or religious homes, but then they changed and they became free thinkers and secular humanists. Well, that shows that it can change anyway. So it's demonstrably false in that sense. Doctrine, that's fine. This reason-based thinking versus faith-based thinking. There's two good writers on this, Dallas Willard and J.P. Moreland. I think his book is Scaling the Secular City. Speaks on what happened at some point when Christian universities, the Christian faith created all these great universities, and then the knowledge separation came in place where you can't have knowledge in spiritual things only in the empirical natural world. There's no knowledge outside of the natural world. And so there became this divide. Now, my first point that I'd want to say, first separating reason-based thinking versus faith-based thinking, is that what would then prove to a secular humanist, or Dr. Shapiro specifically, that there's a religious claim that is true? Or a priori, meaning even before you get to any evidence, you already are committed to naturalism, committed to only what he calls reason-based thinking, and you're not ever going to entertain that. So only with that bias are you then now excising out any miracle that you would be demanding of us. Say we say, I want God to come down through the clouds and say, I am here. We'd say, I'm sorry, I'm a reason-based thinker. I can't look at that. That's faith-based. So do you understand? You're eliminating the evidence before it's set on the table. The other thing is, it is an example of a naturalistic methodology. So you're only considering, as I said, things from the natural world. Science, by definition, it used to be called natural philosophy, and it only examines things that we have access to in this world. So science as itself is not going to explain anything that can't be sensed by the five senses or the scientific method. That's a view that has been abandoned over the last 50 years or so. And it used to be that it would require, knowledge requires verification by scientific method or direct observation through our five senses. Now, the clear reason for everyone why that's been abandoned is because the scientific method itself, our five senses, cannot be empirically verified or demonstrated as reliable by using the scientific method or our empirical senses. Do you understand? That part, how it would be self-defeating. So if everything I need to know to have knowledge, I have to run through scientific tests, and I'll extend that maybe to other sciences like cosmology or any of the hard sciences, physics, biology. If you have to run that test, that scientific method scientifically, how would you do that? You can't, right? Because you can have a system that relies on other values, right? Like honesty, so that the people that you're testing with, you have to trust that they're using the right test tubes. So honesty is a value that has to come to the table. You have to rely on your senses already. You have to rely on mathematics. You have to rely on lots of things that we take for granted as knowledge. We have to rely on that we exist in the first place before you conduct a scientific experiment. So there's a lot of knowledge that comes to the table before we ever engage in the scientific enterprise. You understand what I'm saying there? So clearly, the scientific verification is unjustified. There's lots of other ways that we know this. Just on the ordinary course of events in an ordinary day, all of us woke up. We either were woken up by our kids, as in my case, or an alarm clock, or some other means because we had to get somewhere. We're here. How do we know that? How do we know that we had something at 9 o'clock? How do we know that our alarm clock was reliable? How do we know that our senses weren't tricking us? How do we know that I arranged this whole thing? How do we know we're even sitting here right now? We have knowledge that comes to it by just our direct observation, our memories. There's no way to scientifically go back and test that. That's in our mind. That's a memory. That's this. All that happened could be an illusion, but that's ridiculous. You know, we have to trust our memories, and there's other ways to get knowledge. We could have been told by somebody, hey, there's this reason why class. That's testimony from somebody else. Are we going to say, no, you better show me by some sort of scientific method, because I'm reason-based thinking, not faith-based thinking. No, it seems like the faith-based thinking is a criticism of religion and not of how we know things. I think it's an unjust, secular, sacred divide where we can know things. And in law enforcement and in our investigations, we go by the same means that we all do every day, and that's inference to the best explanation. If we're faced with a set of facts, we see where is that going to fit the explanation that the suspect I think did the crime did in fact do the crime. So I've given a presentation on, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it here, but how to identify narcotics inside of a USPS priority mailbox. How can we show that? Well, there's 4 criteria that 99.9% of all the boxes will have it if it has these 4 criteria, just by looking at it. And there's other things when you're looking for somebody as a suspect that would fit best based on the totality of the circumstances, that what you're proposing is true. So if I want to get a search warrant, it has to be probable cause or over a 50% likelihood, more likely than not, that evidence of a crime is inside that house. So I have to write my case and present it. So, in fact, I've convicted people. People go to jail. People get fined. People go on and get a felony on their record for probable cause, because most of the time they plea out. So they have to think that the reason they're pleading out is there's probably a good case against them, beyond reasonable doubt. But is that not knowledge? There's no science there. Very, very rarely do I even send fingerprints in. It's almost always testimony, circumstantial evidence. This is how we live. This is how we deal with really severe consequences. It's just, it doesn't have to be absolute certainty that you test with a test tube. I think that would really limit us. And I don't think it's being honest, intellectually honest anyway. So I think that the divide between beliefs and faith-based thinking needs to fade away, because it's just not tenable. And Steve, can I ask you to be mindful of my time? Give me a 5-minute warning, because there's not a visible clock here. Thank you. Dr. Shapiro does say, rightly so, he defines factual knowledge as justified true beliefs. That's how my professor, J.B. Moreland, justifies it, and others, whether you're a Christian or an atheist. It's a pretty standard definition. What justifies belief? Dr. Shapiro thinks it's some sort of verification that needs to happen. I've just demonstrated that is certainly not the case, that we can have knowledge based on reliable testimony, based on our senses, our memory, and that kind of thing. And this is just more of the same there. And he he accuses us, Christians, not a personal attack, certainly our methodology, and that's fair enough, that we are question begging. So we come to the table that there's, as he calls it, a deity who is already in existence, who has given revelation to us in the form of Scripture, and then we take that as our starting point and then say, see, God did it, he said it, that settles it for me. The whole point of apologetics, I suggest, is to defend the faith, getting to that point in reverse. And that's how Jesus did it, and that's how God explained it in Scripture. And I'm going to get to that if we have time. But as I do that, I start drifting away from secular humanism, and I just want to say it for now, that there are plenty of places in Scripture. Hebrews 11, for instance, is the theme verse on faith. And it speaks about, it names Abraham, Noah, David, and it speaks on how they reacted and responded in trust, in the confidence that God was there because of a lifetime of having evidence that he was. It's confidence in things hoped for and not seen. Now, I am sympathetic to the fact that there are other, Christianity and other religions aren't the same. In Islam, there's a significant earthly consequence for not converting, and it's pretty clear that countries with Sharia law that are very strictly adhering to the Quran can kill you if you disagree with them in certain ways. So there's a fear component to that is very unattractive to me and many others. In Mormonism, you have you have apologists, but at the end of the day, they rely on a verse where if you have a burning in your bosom and you know that it's true, that's all that matters for me. So I would be sympathetic to the concern that if that's how we're coming across our knowledge, there is no rationale. Then you do have that faith reasoning and then you have the reasoning. You have the reason-based thinking and the faith-based thinking. Because when I was listening to Dr. Shapiro in another talk, which he said the same thing, I was getting angry at first, like I told you all. It's like, no, I don't think that way. He's wrong. But then I thought, no, he means blind faith. Yes, of course. If you come across stuff without looking at any evidence, then that is foolish. And sometimes the evidence is subtle, or sometimes it is a subjective experience. I've talked to people who have had experiences they believe were Christ in a dream or something, and that counts as evidence. But there's also plenty of other evidence, like what Luke describes in this opening opening verses in the book of Luke. He writes to Theophilus saying, I've written these things so that you know what happened. So that's how he starts off the case for Christ. So Christianity, I suggest, is a little bit different. In fact, I want to, let's see, here it is. I want to say what Paul had told us. This is something that is a little shocking if you're going to start a religion. If you're going to come up with something and say, we're gonna maybe get some power here, get a group together. It's a risky thing, but we're gonna come up with something. This is not how you do it. And this, by the way, was written without controversy in the mid-50s, within a generation or so of the crucifixion. Now, if Christ is preached, Paul says, that he has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is vain. Your faith is also vain. Moreover, we've been found to be false witnesses of God, because we've testified against God that he raised Christ, whom he didn't raise. If in fact the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless. You are still in your sins. Then those who have also fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If we have hoped in Christ in this life only, we are of all men most to be pitied. He sets the bar pretty high. And so if Christ wasn't raised, we're done. We need to find another worldview. That's really it. There's another slide where Dr. Shapiro talks about unconvinced Christians, and maybe he could be looping in other religions as well. And there are people who are stubborn, and regardless of the evidence, that they will always stay that way, and that frustrates me too. That's not what the Bible speaks of. That's turning your mind off is not what faith is spoken of in the Bible. We can talk about what other Christians do, but if we talk about what the Bible does, if you type in the word "so you may know," "so they may know," you'll see like 100 different responses, or at least. All throughout the Exodus, the reason for those big miracles were because they wanted to point to God. So God said, "So you may know I am the God of Israel." And then in Jesus' day, when he came wandering through the village and people would come out to see him because of everything they've heard about him, they would see him, and in one account he said, "Your sins are forgiven." But he didn't stop there with some invisible spiritual act. He said, "So that you may know that the Son of Man has come to forgive sins. Get up, take your mat, and go home." He was paralyzed and he got up. And that way it was evidence. It wasn't just, "Your sins are forgiven." He would show something. When he was asked, "Give us a sign," only this wicked generation asked for a sign. The sign you will get is that the Son of Man will be in the he will be in the earth for 3 days, and then he was predicting his resurrection, right? And that is one of the points that I would want to start with in the conversation with any skeptic, is that miracles sound ridiculous to you. I get that. Talking donkey is ridiculous. Parting the Red Sea is absurd. Being in the belly of the whale is crazy, if it was all done naturally. The game changer is the creation event, and that's in the very, very beginning. It starts that way in Genesis. And you don't have to read it as though there's no literary technique of the time, that it's in that order, that there's 6 days of creation. There's all sorts of debate in-house we have about that. I'm just talking about the creation event. And if that happened, as Paul Davies, the atheist astrophysicist, has said, the resurrection is child's play. And if the resurrection, rising from the dead, is child's play, then a talking donkey is weird. But it's easy, right? I mean, let's look at the question of whether or not God exists. I use the example of a pen in the written response, but would it be reasonable for you to say, for me to say, and you to believe, that this recorder here just appeared today before I got here? That it just appeared. It was just there. There's no explanation. Right? We can just accept that, right? No. Well, let's expand that out to everything else. Would it be reasonable to say everything else just happened to appear? When in universal human experience do things pop into being? The objection that, and this is the only game in town for the secular humanists, they have to go with an eternal universe. You can't have a beginning, because what does that mean? Either you say it just popped into existence out of nothing, or you have to accept that somebody did it, or some free agent that was able to decide not to or decided to create. So, and I'm sorry I'm using some faith-based thinking here. I'm kidding. This is just the reason that we can all embrace, right, is that something created. So the odds of God existing, and God is not some white man in a robe with a long, funny beard sitting on a cloud with a cane. He is this first uncaused cause that Aristotle talked about, that Aquinas gave us in the first cause argument. And the only other game in town for the secular humanists is that it's either eternal or there's some sort of a multiverse that continues. And this wasn't something that Dr. Shapiro entered into conversation. But you're starting to get into real kooky territory, because there's absolutely no evidence. It's all completely speculative. The one thing we know is we're here, and there was a creation event. And a lot of the most current astrophysicists that are studying this, and cosmologists, are pointing to a single event. Even if there are multiverses, it had to originate at some particular event. And there's a large argument to go into about that I'm not going to. If it was too late, I just did. Okay, the earth is doomed. Life has no God-given meaning or purpose. The universe is exquisitely indifferent to all that exists. There is no heaven or hell. Life, it is what it is. Crap happens and then we die. That's not how we live typically, because if you really remove all objective meaning, all objective value, we then have a tough time grounding any sort of value in how to treat people nice. Why treat people nice when we squish on bugs, when we take antibiotics and kill bacteria? What makes us special? Human beings are valuable, and if you tell me they're not, I think that's a more controversial statement, right? I don't just think they are. I'm not, and this is the important part I want to get at with morality, is that when we say there are moral values that are objective, we don't say that they are absolute and unchanging as far as our choice is concerned. We're saying they're absolute and unchanging as far as that value is concerned. Human beings have a value no matter where we are in culture, no matter where we are in time. They are always valuable. Now, sometimes in the case of like self-defense, that changes your choice, right? This is an infinitely valuable human person, but now I got to take them out. That's something I have to think about every day because I strap on a gun to my leg or waist or somewhere hidden, and I have to be ready to make that choice. I already made the choice, but I have to be ready to act on it. We all do, in a certain extent. How do we treat people right? The question is why. Why do we not harm people? Because they're special. Why? I have to be like my little toddler daughter. Why? Because eventually you have to get to that answer. Either it's just a brute fact, that's just where we're going to base all our values on humanism, on just my mind, on our collective thinking together. But Nazi Germany did the exact same thing, and I don't mean to be rhetorically insensitive because that's clearly an evil regime. But what if they won World War II? There's, I think, like an Amazon or Netflix show about that, if that happened. What if they won and everybody was now in that camp, and then somebody threatened our country? I mean, do we still fight? Do we still win? Is that our collective morality? No. The judge in the Nuremberg trial said there is a law above the law, because their defense was, no, everybody was doing it. This is our orders. This is our country. You have no right, American Supreme Court Justice, to come over here and tell me how we do things. International relations depend on objective moral values, because you cannot condemn what happens in Rwanda because we are not there. That's their culture. They get to do what they want. No, that's ridiculous. We can say that that's wrong. And the only way you can do that is if there's objective moral values. You also have this, what makes reason-based thinking morality better? What does better mean than anything grounded in the perfect nature of a God? What does that mean, better? How do you improve? What did Martin Luther King do? William Wilberforce? How did, take aside that they were Christians, what did they do to emancipate and to free the slaves and to, in Martin Luther King's, in his work, be able to build in and bring in civil rights that wasn't there in our country? What did they do? They went against the status quo, against the common morality, against the secular humanist thought of the time that, hey, no, we can make our own rules and this is okay for us. You have to condemn him for that because he is going against the common morality. You have no moral reformers, you have no progress, you have no improvement without objective moral values. How about duties and rights? Duty to who? Who do you, if it's written in the sky, if it is something that is unmistakable, that torturing babies for fun is wrong. I think there's something similar that Dr. Shapiro admitted was something that is objectively wrong, which I thank him for. I think we can all say that torturing babies for fun is wrong. But who are we accountable to? Joseph Stalin did lots of bad things. He died a rich and very happy man. There's no justice. There's no duty. You do whatever you can get away with, as long as you don't get caught. I deal with these people every day. They're really sorry when I talk to them, but I can't read their minds. Judge, you get the same thing, I'm sure. I'm sorry. Sorry I was caught. What about rights? Gay rights. What about, why do we want to give people same-sex marriage rights? Why do we want to give any humans rights at all? Why do rights for what? What right do you have? What right is given to you other than your own mentality or the group that you're belonging to? God has made us special in His image, and that comes with it a right to be treated with respect. It also gives you consciousness. And that brings me to before I get into consciousness, I would have to say the other problem that a lot of these, did I miss your 5 minutes? Let me know, buddy. The other thing that is missed in the morality conversation, I think I've addressed the consequences of relativism, of developing our own morality, that we have to have some objective morality, and we all know it because evil wouldn't exist, is that when evil happens, and we all know that it does, I've seen lots of slides on crushed cars and 25,000 babies dying a day, and sometimes in very painful ways. That is only evil in a theistic framework, only evil in an objective sense. You can really not like it. It could be really not your cup of tea, but you cannot say it is evil. The fact evil exists in the world only works in a theistic framework. Now, the next biggest mistake made, and a lot of really smart people make this, Michael Shermer, Richard Dawkins, I think Hitchens did, but I can't quote him, is that when you're talking about morality and how Dr. Shapiro said that morality predates the Abrahamic covenant or Abrahamic religions by thousands of years, it tells me that he's meaning that the knowledge of morality predates the Abrahamic religions. Because if you're saying rape is wrong in an objective sense, I'm talking about the rape, not Dan saying I don't like rape. I'm saying that the actual event of taking advantage and harming somebody, that is wrong. I might know that when I'm 11, 12, 13, as I start thinking about those things. Beforehand, was it wrong before I could understand that it was wrong? Clearly. The cool thing is, that was wrong before humans came on and we discovered it. Or was it invented? And if it's invented, then we can uninvent it and come up with something better. I don't know if that's something we want to tamper with. When we're saying morality, we're talking about an actual part of the universe, moral values that we can cling to. They're invisible. They're not material things. I'm not talking about knowing them. They're two different things. The ontology, the existence of them is different from the epistemology, knowing them, how to come up to them. And Dr. Shapiro takes issue with God giving that revelation to us. But we can start with something very simple, that humans are valuable. A lot flows from there. Okay, just a couple minutes left to go. Let's see here. And a lot of this is fleshed out on my written response. I'm babbling now, and I'm going on longer on some issues and skipping others. So if you'd like that, put your email down and I'll get that to you as well. Let's see, okay. Oh, yeah, I wanted to make mention of this. The evolution issue, real quick, and then I'll wrap up. Evolution is a issue that some Christians have embraced, in a theistic evolution. It's not one I personally hold, but there's a large, significant camp that Christians that say that almost like a deist concept of God creating and setting in motion, and then it evolves. Other Christians take on intelligent design. And just by naming that creationism, saying that it comes back to Genesis and it's that that's just from the Bible, you're doing, again, the genetic fallacy of pointing to its origins rather than saying, no, that's wrong. But intelligent design is just another inference to the best explanation. When you look at the complexity of a DNA molecule and all that it takes to change it, if you have a random mutation, it makes it worse. You have to have a coordinated, orchestrated genetic mutation to make it work. And given the time, it's not even close. So a lot of the evolutionists are abandoning it, and they're not Christians. Many of them aren't even theists. They just don't like Darwin's problem. And Darwin also had another doubt of himself. His theory of how we evolved were relatively advanced primates that came from, he referred to it as monkeys. Okay, let's look at monkeys. Monkeys have a mind that cannot comprehend. They can't rely on their faculties. All they care about is survival. So Alvin Plantinga, a philosopher out of Notre Dame, clung on to that Darwin's doubt. And Darwin was thinking, okay, if a monkey is not thinking what's true, it just wants to survive, how, under a naturalistic framework in evolution, can we trust our mental faculties to know truth? We're just from them. So at what point did humans now be able to focus on truth and not worry about survival as much? Now the focus is truth. See, you can be deluded, and if there's a caveman who is chased by a tiger, and every time that caveman runs the other way, he survives. But he runs the other way because he loves getting eaten by tigers, and he thinks the best way to do that is to run the opposite direction. That's survival. There is no wiring that requires us to have truth. So if you are a naturalist, it's a defeater for reason-based thinking. You cannot trust your mental faculties. As the image of God, our explanation is we are given mental faculties by God who says, let us reason. Let's talk in Q&A. Dr. Shapiro, would you come up? Thank you. Dr. Shapiro, come up, and as he's doing that, Dr. Shapiro is going to give a short response to what I had. We'll engage into a dialogue. And then if you want to get your questions, I think Todd and Steve in the back have cards. Fill those out, because now time's running, and you got about 5-10 minutes before we're going to get into questions. So get them to them quickly. Come on up, Dr. Shapiro. Everybody welcome back Dr. Shapiro. Dr. Shapiro is 36 years as a podiatrist here in town. He, for the last 10 years, has been teaching and leading on the board of the Freethought Arizona group, and they meet every Sunday and speak on issues relating to what you're hearing about today with secular humanism, although maybe they're not challenged on it all the time. But that's who Dr. Shapiro is, and he came last week, as you all know, and we're going to, after his 5-minute response, sit down and have a conversation. Dr. Shapiro? It's working?
Thank you, Dan. Before I start, I told Dan I would say something very nice about him, but I don't want it to eat into my 5 minutes. Dan and I have been working on this presentation for the last couple of months, and it's been a pleasure working with him. I mean, we really are simpatico on a lot of different things, other than, the issue at hand. But he did something yesterday that I thought was just wonderful, and I'm not sure I would have done it. He gave me his talk for today. Now, if you're debating someone, having a discussion, it's not like you want to crush the other person, but you do want to come out a little bit ahead. So he had every right to just do his thing today, and it'll be the first time I'm seeing it. And it's not like I would be caught, as we say in my profession, flat-footed, but I wouldn't have the time to really go into what he's saying and try to get as thoughtful a response as he made, a thoughtful, analysis of what I had presented last week. And it goes to his integrity and his honesty, and I thought it was the most Christian thing to do. You're welcome. However, that said, now for the jugular. there are a lot of things that Dan brought up today that either I was kind of misquoted, which is a little difficult to do when my slides are up there, but misunderstood, and some things I totally disagree with, especially on the morality part. And I'm just going to kind of jump into a couple of things, and now the clock starts 5 minutes, and then, and if there's something that I have not addressed in the Q&A, please, ask us. First of all, this stress that I may have put on the scientific method, yes, the scientific method is a wonderful method to find out facts. It is not the only method. Good history is, trust, honesty, intuition a lot of times. So I don't mean that scientific method is the only way to do it, but it is one that has proven itself. So for example, if you want to know the validity of the historical claims of the Bible, you have to evaluate it based on good historical analysis. So for example, historians can only talk about what most likely happened in the past. They can't repeat the past. So when secular humanists think about the credibility or reliability of the Bible, we say, well, how do we know what most likely happened? And one of the things that in apologetics is that there's this stress on miracles and that they really did happen. Well, there's no historian in his right mind that would give credibility to a miracle, because a miracle is the least probable thing that could happen. And he would not be in a position to justify it. That's a scientific claim that something defied natural laws. So just an example of how we get to know things. Also, this is one of those that, it's a scratch that I can't itch. No, an itch that I can't scratch, excuse me. This thing with slavery. Yes, there were Wilberforce and other people who worked to end slavery, but let's not forget, in the Old Testament, slavery was endorsed, condoned. Jesus never talked against it. Be careful when you go down that road about slavery, because as much as Christians tried to abolish slavery, there were many who justified slavery as part of, it's in the Bible, then it's something that is okay to do. Now, this is on indoctrination. It's a pejorative word. It doesn't, you don't feel good when you say something is indoctrinated, but really listen to this, and if you want to challenge me on it, feel free. Teaching a belief as if it were fact, is called indoctrination. It rightly carries a pejorative term, since that's the wrong thing to do. Teaching factual knowledge as fact is rightly called education. Our camp does not teach secular humanism as a fact, but as a worldview and philosophy to consider as the one most useful to live by. Do you see the nuance there? If you want to challenge me on that, let me have it, but that, I think, is a clarification. Dan alluded to blind faith. To differentiate faith from blind faith, in our view, is about as useful as rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, as they say. It's one's are just an extreme of the other. Secular humanist overriding assessment of whether a statement or action is moral is whether or not it promotes well-being to all the parties. Dan was going into some kind of thing that we can't do. Of course we can. There's kind of fixed morality among secular humanists. Brought up the thing about babies. My goodness, of course. There's some fixed things that are not right to do if it doesn't better the well-being of people. But then there are, let's call variable things like, the last part of the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness, etc., etc. Or two more, etc. Well, sometimes it's right to kill. When Dan straps on that gun, if he gets into a situation where someone's coming at him, he's going to kill him. And Dan's not going to have two thoughts about the fact that he violated the Ten Commandments. If your family's starving, you're going to steal a loaf of bread, you're going to steal an apple. These are variable things. We don't, as secular humanists, we don't like to be put into straitjackets that we have to think a certain way. And, to be very honest, I always wonder when people say to be very honest as if the last part of it wasn't very honest. But when you talk about that it comes from the Jewish and the Christian God, objective morality, think of the horrible things that were done by God and at God's directive in the Old Testament. Even, the kinder Jesus in the New Testament, he still condemns everyone to torture and hell if you don't believe in him. That's not nice. Also, to leave your family, because, unless you leave your family, you're not worthy of being with me. That's not family values. So when you start talking about objective morality being, the underpinning of religion, you got to get into the Bible and understand. And by the way, just a little aside, none of us have read the Bible. I haven't read it, Dan hasn't read it, you haven't read it, and the Pope hasn't read it. The Bible, as hopefully you've been taught, is a compilation of work that was done over 1,500 years, translated, copied, with errors and inconsistencies. So the Bible that you're reading now has gone from Aramaic to Greek to Latin to English, with all sorts of agendas by the people who wrote them. That's why there's so many different denominations of your religion. There are over 300. If everything was clear and concise, we wouldn't have that. So there's a lot more I can talk about, but my 5 minutes is up.
Dan's supposed to do that at the end, but not today. Okay, I have the impossible task of trying to get through all of these questions. So the first one, I like this, it's to both of you. We can go ahead and do the home court advantage. Doc, you can start with this. How do you define faith?
Faith is, we can talk about almost a dictionary definition as belief in the absence of evidence, or belief in spite of evidence to the contrary. That's kind of a dictionary definition. Faith is actually a claim that there's a unique pathway to a certain body of knowledge that we have, like Christians have, as a group. Jews have it, Islamists have it, Muslims. That is not open to anybody else. It's not open to anybody else. And this is one of the questions, I think Dan should address is, how do Christians claim this unique access to this knowledge, to the knowledge, for example, that there's a supernatural? As secular humanists, we're always like, before you talk about gods and Jesus and spirits and demons, you have to lay the groundwork that there is a supernatural realm that is not our natural realm. And this is something that is glossed over by many religionists, but it's the underpinning of your religion. These gods live in the supernatural realm. They also live in the natural world too, but they interact with the natural world. And we wonder, how do you claim that this supernatural exists? And then how do you go on to claim that you have a special access to it that we don't?
Okay.
Good question.
Dan, same question for you,
Yeah.
and your definition of what it is,
Okay.
not necessarily what it is not.
Right. Well, that is a good question, and I appreciate you, Gil, clarifying that secular humanist or your personal view of faith. Can everybody hear me? Trying this. Okay. And a lot of people, even Christians, other religions, people will have their own definition. But what matters to me is what the Bible, as that is our reference for who God revealed himself. So my concern is what the Bible says. And I like Dr. Shapiro's term trust. And I'm not saying putting words in his mouth. He makes a distinction between faith and trust. But the Bible does not. In fact, pisteo, the Greek word that was used when the Gospels were put to pen, is translated as trust, as an assured trust. And that's not just using word games, because when it is used in context, that is the meaning of it. So your sins are forgiven, but so you can trust in that, get up and walk. Now the question of why the knowledge is especially accessible to Christians, I would say that it's not. Atheists come to Christianity, not all the time, but some have, and that is not something that's kept just in the realm of religious people. In fact, all of the initial followers were non-Christian. All of the original followers of Christ were non-Christian. And not only that, it came at great cost. They lost their families, even Jesus himself did at the beginning. And the best history that scholarship that's out there shows it's not safe to say that all the apostles died under torture and didn't recant. We can't say that, but we know that they all suffered for the teaching the resurrection, which was the central message of the gospel. So it was reached out to the world, to the Ethiopian eunuch in the south, and to all the way up to Asia in the north. So they're in the east. There's lots of people who were not privy to the knowledge that were exposed to it and embraced it.
Next two questions, one for each of you. Dr. Shapiro, if Christ's resurrection from the dead is a true fact, what effect would that have on a secular humanist?
If it were proven, we'd be all down on our knees in about 5 seconds. If that were proven as an absolute fact, and that, we could have questions about, the morality of what's called substitutionary atonement, someone else taking on your sins and all that, or vicarious redemption, as it's called in other places. But in the bigger picture, if a religion, if Islam or Judaism were absolutely proven to us, beyond a reasonable doubt, that it was valid, the logical extension of our worldview is to follow it. But the resurrection, for multiple reasons, not just the event itself as being strange, and I don't mean that, what I mean is that it's an extraordinary claim. And as Carl Sagan said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and there is no extraordinary evidence for a resurrection. But there's the morality of it, there's the actual event itself, there's what it represents, etc., etc. So I hope I'm answering that question. If it were proved, I'd be joining our people in agreeing.
Thank you, Doctor. Dan, this next question is to you. Dan, you use Scripture as a source of factual knowledge. Do you think the Bible is inerrant, and please explain?
I do think the Bible is inerrant, but that's not germane to this conversation, because a reliable source can be imperfect. And just to bring in what I know when I read reports, even if it's from other law enforcement officers, there's sometimes mistakes. But I know the gist is there. And one of the threads that runs through all the early sources we have for Jesus contains threads of historical knowledge that are reliable. And there's ways to test that through historiography. The scholars in historical Jesus research are not all Christians, believe it or not, and Bart Ehrman's a good example. And so they use this very particular criteria of authenticity, methods that are employed to see the reliability of that account, and any account of the ancient world, but especially in the historical Jesus studies. And that is, if an account is embarrassing, if it's something that's not helpful to spreading religion, but you included it, like the women discoverers of the empty tomb, for example, or an early account, and the Gospels predate any other historical account except for maybe a couple of the Caesars as far as early, and then multiple independent attestations. So if you're coming at it from multiple angles, the only reason to kick out the Gospels is because you don't like them, because they contain religious accounts, but so did all the other Roman historians. So there's factual basis that you can use a criteria to affirm what's counted in the Gospels. That doesn't go back all the way. You can't confirm a lot in the Old Testament because there isn't anything from that time. So you can have knowledge and assurance in it, and it doesn't have to be that academic. But that's one way to come across it as a skeptic.
All right, now, Doc, I have an emailed question, because apparently we're simulcasting this. It just says, as evolution is not testable, why must it be taught as fact? That's the header, but it goes on. I'm in complete agreement with the scientific process and I am concerned with people who use their faith in God to keep them from asking the hard questions and furthering knowledge. However, what do you do when the scientific process is constrained by elements like time and perplexity? For example, the concept of macroevolution is completely not testable unless you do have a couple of billion years to test it. However, the philosophy of secular humanism and naturalism hinges upon its fact. And then it's almost done here. You should have no problem, Doctor. You're a very, very smart man. You can just keep it up there. No visuals. Aren't secular humanists and naturalists conveniently redefining their belief in an untestable hypothesis as trusting in science? Where does trust become belief?
Give me an hour. Let me just approach this a couple of ways because I could talk for a long time on this subject. Evolution, if there was a picture of Dan up here, and there were a couple of little spots that were missing in the photograph, and I said, "Who's that?" You'd say, "It's Dan," but there's a couple little spots missing. That's the same thing with evolution. It has been, and I know you don't like the word overwhelmingly, but I'm going to say it, overwhelmingly agreed to by all branches of science. There is not a mass defection about evolution. There's always a question about connecting some dots, like putting those little pictures back, the little parts back in the picture of Dan up there. But the overall picture of evolution is not questioned. Now, to tell you how strong evolution is in the scientific community, it is considered a scientific truth. And what I mean by that is has raised to the level of theory. And you know, the same way apologetics is a confusing term because like, I'm not apologizing for Christianity. No, apologetics means, in this case, to defend. The same thing with the theory. Dan gets some information about a crime. He has a theory of, how did this happen? In science, it's exactly the opposite. I hate the term, but if you know mathematics, you have the word theorem. That's kind of where it's coming from. It means a collection of facts that is so strong that to think that it's not right, you'd have to be crazy. Now, what are other scientific theories? The germ theory of medicine, that disease is caused by germs and viruses. The atomic theory of matter, that matter is composed of atoms and even smaller elements and molecules and all that. That's a theory. Plate tectonics, that our Earth is on plates that move, is a theory. It does not mean a guess. It means it is as good as it gets. It is a scientific truth unless otherwise told. Evolution is exactly that. It is a theory. When I say the theory of evolution, that is as high as it goes. It's the gold medal, to use a common phrase this week, of scientific thought. Now, if someone really wanted to challenge evolution, like creationism or intelligent design, and trust me, this is going on a long time, they would win the Nobel Prize if they discovered that evolution was not correct. No one has even come close to that. This has been fought in the courts. There was a 139-page decision by Judge Jones a number of years ago in Pennsylvania that basically said creationism and intelligent design, as we sometimes say, is really creationism in a cheap tuxedo. No offense meant, but that's what it's been said. Is a religious position. Because imagine if the creationist or the intelligent design person who claims that it's not really God, but it is, took away the religious part. Where would he be? What would his criticisms of evolution be if religion was not the underpinning of his criticism? So I could go on a lot more about evolution, and maybe there's a time when we could have a discussion specifically about that, but that's about as good an answer as I can give you.
Thank you, Doctor. Dan, what good or practical action can a Christian do that a secular humanist cannot do?
Worshiping God sincerely.
All right. Excellent. Dr. Shapiro, what do you believe is the purpose?
I don't mean to, because we don't...
That doesn't mean you get his time. I'm kidding.
But the question was improperly phrased. It's a classic question in our camp. And the question is this: what moral statement or action done by a Christian can not be done by a non-Christian? I'll repeat it. what moral statement or action done by a Christian cannot be done, and sometimes that is worded as, cannot be done by an atheist? Dan?
Well, I would say the worshiping God still stands, but I think it is a question that directs us down away from the more important question of where does morality come from, what's the basis, what keeps us accountable, because if it is ultimately relativism, we can all do whatever we want, can be completely opposite things and still be moral. It's only when you have objective values that you can ground, and that both of you are bound by the same rules, whether you're in a different time, a different location, that you can then start comparing moral actions. You cannot compare them if it's all subjective.
Quick, somebody asked me a question about morality.
Ask the corollary to that. Name one religious figure that's done an immoral act or done an immoral statement. That'll come to everyone's mind probably right now. You can think of one right now, and later you probably think about 4 or 5 people.
Question?
Okay. All right, so the next one I would ask is, Doctor, what do you believe is the purpose of life, and why are we here?
You know, it is a fascinating question. It's been asked since Aristotle and all that. And people have come up with, because our actual existence is, talk about a rarity. Imagine if you held hands with your mother and your father, and they held hands with their mother and father, and now we're going to go to a scientific thing, and imagine how far back we can go. We can go back as far as human beings were human beings about 150, 200,000 years ago. I don't mean to get an argument about creationism, but go with me on this one. And imagine that if everything did not happen with your 10,000 ancestors, that happened in just the way it did, that you wouldn't be here, right? You would not be here. If another sperm other one than the one that fertilized your mother's egg had fertilized you, of the 300 million that joined that nice evening together, you would be a brother or sister. Or you might have been aborted. Over 40% of pregnancies are aborted. So, what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? I don't have a clue. You know, there was a time a few years ago, one of the things I wanted to do in my life was kind of pay my respects at Auschwitz, concentration camp in Poland, where 6 million Jews were murdered during World War, but 1 million were wiped out at Auschwitz. And I walked in the gas chambers, and I said to myself, why them and not me? And I went up to the wall, and I think if I was there during that time, I'd be scratching to get out. And when you walk out of the gas chamber at Auschwitz, the ovens are right there. And I said, children, adults, willy-nilly, exterminated. Not me, though. I'm coming as a tourist to watch it. I can't explain that. So, why? What's the purpose in life? I will say this, that there's a book by one of your pastors, The Purpose-Driven Life. Very popular, Warren. But our side says that it's a life-driven purpose, meaning that we have to figure out what's best for us, because we are in it alone. This is the only life. This life is not a transition to a heaven. This life is not a transition to a hell. This is it as far as we know. And let's not look at this life as something, that we have to do things in order to get into an eternity. As far as we know, this is it, and we have to make our own meaning and purpose.
So Doug, I'm going to pretend like I'm reading this off of a card. The picture that you've painted, one of the evolutionary process, the one of scientific method, many of the secular humanists and the atheists and anti-theists make the case that this world just does not care. So whereas through your very powerful testimony, your heart breaks when you think of the atrocities of Auschwitz, as do all of ours. But on what basis does the secular humanist have to say that that was wrong if the universe itself and the scientific method does not care?
This is a good point. It gets to the morality issue. Secular humanists are not idiots. We know that there are things that happen. Let me just back up a little bit. We have been living together as human beings for a heck of a long time. And we know intuitively what works and what doesn't. Honesty works. Not killing each other. Not stealing from each other. Trusting each other. This and that. This is stuff that, as I said in the slide, sociologists and anthropologists have known about human nature. And when you know that you don't follow the directives of your God to kill people who work on the Sabbath or non-virgins on their wedding night and all these things, that you are using human values, secular values to say, no, I'm not going to do that just because God did it or directed someone to do it. We know right from wrong. And as I said, the best thing I can say is if it promotes well-being, if it promotes happiness, then we're for it. If you bear with me 1 second, I suggested this affirmation of humanism that is by Paul Kurtz, who's the leading modern promoter of secular humanism. But in this affirmation, which is probably about 30 different things, he talks about morality. And he says, we believe in the common moral decencies, altruism, integrity, honesty, truthfulness, responsibility. Humanist ethics is amenable to critical and rational guidance. There are normative standards that we discover together. Moral principles are tested by their consequences. That's what I mean by, does it promote well-being? It's called a consequentialist philosophy. If it promotes well-being, fine, we're in. If it doesn't, we're out. Don't make us as the people who have no clue. One of the things that we love to talk about is that if what you're saying about our morals is true, then prisons should be overwhelmingly filled with non-believers, specifically atheists. You know what? They're not. The majority of people who are in prison identify as religious and, sorry to say, mostly Christian. It is a fact. So, we talk about, well, how do we know things? Well, experience, observation, and the fact that just because I don't believe in God, I don't run wild, and nor do any other secular humanists that I know. We're as good and as much as scoundrels as anybody else is. Look at the priests in the Catholic Church, what they did. You're talking about God's emissaries on earth. Thousands of them abused children. Where was God to stop that? God's looking down at that and going, well, I could stop it, but I don't think so.
Let me follow up for just one thing, if I could. You mentioned happiness, well-being, consequences, but those are more leading terms, and that my question would be, why are those things we should value, and even survival itself? I mean, we try to, like I said, kill bacteria. There's any threats to us, we kill. Why are we supposed to succeed? Why is human happiness important in a larger objective sense other than like a mind-independent sense? So regardless of my happiness, your happiness, what we think, what matters? There's sadists out there that enjoy being hurt. So that's an exception. That's very extremely rare. But why is happiness, well-being, trustworthiness, all those virtues that were explained there, what makes those good?
I think it's just common sense.
Brute fact.
A brute fact that being happy is better than suffering, than being sad. And it's happiness as a community for individuals and for the community.
And if another community like Nazi Germany and the Allies, so if they have different values, who wins?
What Germany did, what Hitler did, was wrong. And by the way, Hitler was not an atheist, he was Catholic. And if you read Mein Kampf, you'll see a lot of references to him just doing what God, he thought, wanted to do with the Jews. Wow. Remember, after Abraham's compact with the Jews way back when, he said, I will protect you always if you believe in me, as the only God. And we've never seen a century go by without problems for Jews. And Hitler just wanted to follow on the tradition, unfortunately, that was done at a lot of times by Christians against Jews over the years. Now, there were an awful lot of Christians who rejected that, but there was a lot. One of the biggest drivers of anti-Semitism, if you look in the history books, was Christianity, sad to say. So I don't know whether I answered that question or not, but...
I didn't mean to bring the Nazis as a tough one. I've been in Buchenwald and had the same kind of response when I was there, but and I don't want to eat into the question time here either. It's just the question was, if you have two groups that differ, or you have the people that wanted slavery in the South, and then we came in and then changed it for a better, for an improvement, how do you have two cultures with two value sets be compared to each other if there's no standard above the community?
It's intrinsic. It's in and of itself. Is it good or bad? We don't think that some kind of object is floating out there that talks about morality.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, I've been trying to go through and find things that have been addressed. So I've just got a couple here that I'm just going to take a stab at. Doctor, and this is again to moral decisions, it seems to be where we are. It states that I don't see how you can make moral decisions based on the scientific method, and continues, how can you decide that dying for another is a moral or immoral act using only the scientific method?
I don't think you can. Dying for somebody else, that's a question of morality and ethics. And that issue that we talked about, this, what Jesus did on the cross for you, from our point of view, it's like, how can someone take on himself the sins of the world? Where's personal responsibility? I mean, the thought that a serial killer on his deathbed has a religious conversion and says, Jesus, I accept you as my Lord and Savior, I repent my sins, you know the drill. And then is forgiven, absolved. No questions asked. It's by faith, right? With Catholics, a little bit more work in there, but with your branch of Christianity, it is faith. It is an extremely easy thing to get into heaven, according to your religion. But we find that offensive. Where's the personal responsibility? And you know, you can do a lot of things to help out a friend, but to absolve them of responsibility, that's not one of them. And we find that that's, you know, and there are a lot of other issues related to the resurrection and that whole issue that we could talk about, but we'll leave it at that.
Can I just say one quick thing? Is something I forgot in my response to you that might help with the substitutionary atonement. I think it might have been our Stephen Gino pastor who mentioned this, is that if you have a incident where we all get tickets, we all, you know, this happened in LA when they started ticketing us as federal agents going up to the courthouse, and one day they just decided, ticket them all, and so there was like 30 or 40 tickets that one day. So there's a big line at the courthouse trying to get out of it or pay it, and it would be akin to the judge saying, look, it's a rule, it's our system, it'd be unjust to just wave it away. Something has to be done. And then he takes off his gown, comes down, gets his wallet out, and he pays the fine. And that is an illustration, not an argument. But it shows that it's reasonable, and it doesn't sound on the face of it that there's something absurd or unjust about that. What would you say?
I think that example, in your world, it's like the difference between throwing a bullet and shooting a bullet. It's so far away from, I mean, I can understand the judge, you know, being a nice guy and paying it, or he had the power to just, trust me, judges wipe away tickets a lot. But we're talking about the thought of relieving someone of their responsibility, their morality, that they did bad things over time, to get into an eternity of bliss. When you have people who, as I said last week, have gone from one oven to another just because they didn't accept Jesus, it just doesn't make any sense. And I think it's questionable in morality to accept that.
Okay, so this is what I'm thinking. I do have on a suit coat, so obviously I'm pretty important. Their jobs were to prepare for this, and mine was to bring the index card, so you're welcome. This is what we'll do, if it's all right. I have one final question we're going to ask Dr. Shapiro, and then I thought, Doctor, if you would transition that into your closing remarks. Dan, you follow, and then we'll go. So Doc, in light of our time speaking about morality and some of the moral judgments that have been made up here, how does a secular humanist justify or not justify abortion, given everything that we've spoken on? Figure we go with an easy one to end.
An easy topic, abortion. One of the toughest issues. I respect people on both sides of the matter, because are you taking a life when you have an abortion? Yes, you are. It's an early form of life, but it is a human life. Yeah. Is abortion a routine way for birth control to happen? No, no one would recommend that. But we have to understand that abortion is an individual thing, both with the woman and her doctor and her sense of her worldview. And I'm just going to throw out something very quickly. It's just something to ponder, and it's not an answer or an explanation. But think of this. How many people here are here because their mother had an abortion? I'm here because my mother had 2 miscarries, and then I took, so to speak. How should I feel about those 2 miscarries that she had? Those were 2, my brother and sister, and and I was the lucky one who got here. Also, think about the 15-year-old girl who gets pregnant. She doesn't want to, the circumstances are whatever you want, but there are 2 things she can do. If she has the abortion, very tough situation, but she goes back to school, gets a degree, and now a guy looks at her, she's very sweet, very nice, and he marries her, and they have 3 children. Second scenario, this same girl gets pregnant, says, I can't abort. It's a sin to do that. So she goes and she has the baby. She keeps the baby. It ties her down. She cannot get her education. Some guys will look at her, and I don't mean to use this word pejoratively, but sometimes men will look at women who have children out of wedlock, who have kept them, as quote-unquote damaged goods. A terrible statement, a terrible thing. But some men, they don't want a woman who's had a child from somebody else. So she never gets ahead in life. She resents the child resents her. It's terrible. But the bottom line is those 3 children that she would have had she had the abortion would never be here if she went ahead and had the abortion. Now, do we say, well, we could stretch that logic out all over the place, but it is a fact of life that if your mother maybe had an abortion and then she married your father and wouldn't have had she kept that child, would you be here? These are kind of philosophical kind of things, but they are part of the abortion discussion that is not often talked about. So the bottom line with abortion is I can see the argument on both sides. I think it boils down to me that it is a choice. It is a terribly difficult choice for most people. But to overtly ban abortion, especially with rape, incest, and those kind of things, that I certainly don't agree with. But that's a discussion for another time.
Abortion is incredibly complex emotionally, very simple intellectually. There are only 5 things that we can consider when comparing the fetus to a person: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Size, we don't kill people because they're small. Level of development. I am less developed than Dr. Shapiro, given the years of maturation that he's had on me. I'm not pointing that out to offend you. Environment. When I leave the stage, I'm no less valuable than I am up here. And degree of dependency. My 3-year-old girl would still die if I didn't go back home and feed her, bring her back here with me and feed her. The other point to make is not all death is the same. You mentioned that the miscarriage rate. My wife is in labor and delivery, and I hear the god-awful stories almost every day. It's not an easy job. It's the best day of the life for the people when it goes right. When it goes wrong, it's bad. But when it goes bad and there's a miscarriage, that is an act of nature. From a theist perspective, people are free will beings separate from nature. So under theism, I can say abortion is an act of free will by someone upon another person. So those two are different kinds of deaths. Now, if it was all part of nature, my answer would be different. But it's not.
Okay, so in 30 seconds, each of you, Doctor, will you encourage this crowd with that which you would like to leave them with?
No, I'm not going to say. It's just getting into that. First of all, in 30 seconds, I would like to thank you for being such a gracious audience to me, knowing that so many of you don't agree with what I'm saying, and but are willing to listen to, we'll call it the other side. And hopefully these kinds of discussions can go on not only in this church, but in other churches, because, like I said in the very beginning when I gave the talk last week, that we're here, you're here, but we're all in this world together, and we need to build bridges for, first of all, to understand each other better, and then to see if we can each negotiate a little bit, to compromise a little bit, to make our society workable for people who have different worldviews, and I think that's a noble goal to shoot for. So I thank you so much for being such a great audience.
Well, first of all, Dr. Shapiro, thank you so much for coming back again. I mean, it was great for you to come the first time, but the second time is just as great or better. And I would just say that it is a little apprehensive for people and probably leaders of the church to have a skeptic coming to teach here or to present on secular humanism. But I am so glad that we did it because you were very graceful, very respectful, and I picked the right guy to do this. So I appreciate that. I look forward to speaking at your group. And these ideas are tough. A lot of this stuff comes with emotional baggage on both sides, right? Where there's consequences if we get things wrong, or consequences if we say the wrong thing, or if we believe differently sometimes. We could lose friends. We've done that. But that's why we have to have it. And my concern as a Christian is not the angry atheist, or the secular humanist, or the Mormon that knocks on my door. I'm more concerned about the people who don't care. America is such a great country. The West is so comfortable that people just forget about the big issues of life and live in their own little worlds. Here, both groups, I think, have this in common. We focus on the big issues of life. You guys seek out meaning and purpose and values, and that's why we're here talking about it. That's what makes it interesting. So thank you.
So the questions we did not get to, and I know you're probably going to be mad at me in the breezeway, I'm going to make sure that they go to the intended, and then I'm going to close this out the way we Christians do. Father God, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for our guests who are here. Lord, we are so grateful that they're with us. Father, I pray that we would follow the model of your Son, Jesus, and do everything in love. And Lord, as we think of the Bible, as Dan said, if the Christians, if we are wrong, we are to be pitied above everybody. And as Dr. Shapiro said, if in fact the Bible is right, then every knee shall bow. So Lord, I pray that that will be in our minds as we leave here, and that you would give us a wonderful rest of our day. In Jesus' name, amen.